Welcome everyone to the Disability Futures Virtual Festival. Session 4, Choosing Ourselves and Each Other, Queer Disabled Legacies, Desires, and Dreams. The Ford Foundation is committed to making our events as accessible and welcoming to as many people as possible. This evening, we're integrating accessibility through self-descriptions you'll hear each speaker give, live captioning, audio descriptions, and American Sign Language. Audio descriptions are available by clicking on the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen and selecting the audio description channel. You may hear our presenters take brief pauses throughout today's program. Please note that this is intentional to give our audio describers the opportunity to describe the visuals for those utilizing that channel. Closed captions are available by clicking on the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and turning on the captions. Alternatively, you can find the stream text link in the chat box or your participation guide. We actively encourage you to use the chat to interact with and react to the program. Please click on the chat button at the bottom of your screen. This will open the chat panel and let you send messages to panelists and attendees. We are dedicated to providing a harassment-free digital experience for everyone. Harassment refers to conduct that is unwelcome or uncomfortable. We do not tolerate harassment of presenters or participants in any form and will promptly remove anyone who does so. If you are being harassed, notice that someone else is being harassed, or have any other concerns, please contact events@fordfoundation.org immediately. For any technical questions during the event, please email av@fordfoundation.org and we will do our best to assist you. Thank you for joining us. Our program will begin shortly. Please welcome Blaine Harwell.
Hello, everyone. I'm pleased to welcome you to the closing session of this first day of the Disability Futures Virtual Festival, and to introduce a session that is bringing me a lot of joy: Choosing Ourselves and Each Other, Queer Disabled Legacies, Desires, and Dreams. I'm Blaine Harwell, and I have the honor of serving on the Creativity and Free Expression team at Ford, and as the responsible program officer for Disability Futures, which Ford is supporting in partnership with the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. I am a queer, white, middle-aged person. My disabilities are not visible. I have shoulder-length blonde hair and am wearing a gray jacket with a zipper. I have a wall of windows to my right and a white wall behind me. My pronouns are they and he. I am greeting you today from Ohlone Land in San Francisco. The work of creativity and free expression at Ford is to explore how cultural narratives affect and shape our reality, and how the arts, journalism, and film can contribute to fairer and more just societies. We're committed to strengthening diverse networks of cultural producers and decision makers. We seek to illuminate the root causes of injustice. Created by, for, and with disabled creative practitioners and administered by United States artists, Disability Futures is an initiative to resource and spotlight the work of disabled creatives working across disciplines and across geography, and to amplify their voices individually and collectively. As those of you who have been following the festival have witnessed, the inaugural cohort of 20 Disability Futures creatives is exceptionally diverse, with an emphasis on disabled practitioners who have been further marginalized by racism, sexism, heterosexism, and transphobia. The fellows were nominated by their peers to both honor legacies of achievement and elevate emerging artistry and ideas. This virtual festival celebrates the art, performance, and ideas of the inaugural fellows and their collaborators. In this session, Disability Futures Fellows Eli Clare, Leah Lakshmi Peepshna Sumarshina, Ryan Haddad, and Sky Kubakub will explore the legacies and intertwined histories of disability justice embedded in their work. They will reflect on the evolution of how their work has explored crip risk, pleasure, and celebration from the mid-1990s to now. Following this discussion, Sky will host a closing party to leave us basking and celebrating queer disabled communities together, with music by DJ Who Girl and evening runway performances from models wearing their rebirth garments. Yes, yes, it's a dance party. Eli is a white, disabled, genderqueer activist survivor poet who seeks to nourish survival and dreaming with shivers of beauty, images of liberation, and negotiations with history. Eli builds narratives that center disability, queerness, transness, the natural world, and social justice, and his distinct style of weaving together fiction and nonfiction in poems, essays, and books has laid the groundwork for a fluidity and form that echoes the fluidity and complexity found within disability communities. Leah is a queer, disabled, non-binary femme writer, performer, space creator, freedom dreamer, and disability and transformative justice movement worker of Burgher, Tamil, Sri Lankan, Irish, and Roma ascent. She is the author and co-editor of 9 books. She's been the lead artist for the Disability Justice Performance Collective, Sins Invalid, since 2009. Co-created performance disability art, Mangoes with Chili, and Toronto's Asian Arts Freedom School, and is on the programming team for the Disability and Intersectionality Summit. Ryan is an actor, playwright, and autobiographical performer with cerebral palsy. His acclaimed solo play, Hi, Are You Single?, was presented in the public theaters Under the Radar Festival and continues to tour the country. He has a recurring role on the Netflix series, The Politician, with additional television appearances on Bull, Madam Secretary, and Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. Sky is a non-binary queer and disabled Filipinx human from Chicago. Rebirth Garments is their line of wearables for the full spectrum of gender, size, and ability. They maintain the notion of radical visibility, a movement based on claiming our bodies. Through the use of bright colors, exuberant fabrics, and innovative designs, they refuse to assimilate, spearheading a queer and disabled dress reform movement. My many thanks to these participants. Thanks also to our friends at United States Artists for administering the Disability Futures program, especially Program Manager Ezra Venus, Lou Zhang, and previous Executive Director Dina Hagag, who helped bring this project into life. Thanks to our friends at Mellon, in particular, Elizabeth Alexander, Emil Kang, and Yasmin Allen Martai for their partnership. And thank you to all of my colleagues at Ford, especially Darren Walker, Margaret Morton, for their commitment to this work, and my colleagues in Creativity and Free Expression, and the events and AV teams who made this festival happen. Sierra Paller, Tara Romig, Lennox King, and Francisco Areso. And thanks to all of you who are joining us from across the country and across the globe. I hope that this bring you joy, disability joy, queer joy, and help you dream. I hope it will help deepen your awareness of current and emerging practices and content, your engagement and support of disabled creatives, and collaboration across artistic and disability communities. Together, as a community of shared interest and purpose, we can advance disability futures. And of course, I hope you will dance. As a reminder, to support access needs for this session, we are providing American Sign Language, which you'll already notice on your screen, closed captioning, which can be turned on or off at any time, and audio description via the audio description channel. With that, I would like to turn it to Ryan, who will moderate the session. Thank you all for being a part of the festival. Enjoy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan J. Haddad. I am so honored and excited to be here to welcome you to this extraordinary conversation. It hasn't happened yet, but I know it's going to be extraordinary. Choosing ourselves and each other, queer disabled legacies, desires, and dreams. My name is Ryan Haddad, and I am a Lebanese American man with short black hair. I have round green rimmed glasses, and I'm wearing a pink button down shirt. And I have a painting. Well, I have a sort of bedroom set up behind me. One of the things is a gorgeous painting by Disability Futures facilitator Ezra Bennis. I'm so thrilled to call my friend. I will be moderating today's session, and I am told to tell you that I'm an actor, playwright, and autobiographical performer, which means that I'm usually used to telling stories about myself, but not tonight. That's not what's going to happen. Tonight we have three exceptional, brilliant artists and my dear, dear co-fellows in the Disability Futures Initiative, this inaugural class. And it's I'm getting emotional. My great honor to introduce them to you tonight. Please welcome Eli Clare, Leah Lakshmi Piepzna Samara Sinha, and Sky Kubaku of Rebirth Garments. I'm so happy to see you all. I'm going to have you introduce yourselves one at a time, visual description and all the stuff that you already know is coming. But first, let's the audio describer describe the slide. All right. Eli, do you want to get started with your introduction?
Thank you, Ryan. I'm Eli Clare. He or they work as pronouns. I'm zooming from occupied Abenaki territory, the ancestral, current, and future land of the Abenaki and Wabanaki Confederacy, currently also known as Vermont. I am a white, transmasculine, genderqueer person. I have short and shaggy strawberry blonde hair. I'm wearing a black shirt that says love greater than fear. I'm sitting in a mango yellow room with some fabric art behind me and massive printer and lamp even farther behind me, and really happy to be here.
Leah, would you like to go next?
Yes, I would love to go next. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Leah Lakshmi Piepzna Samara. Hey, I'm Leah. I am a non-binary, middle-aged femme babe who has light brown skin, really dark magenta lipstick, whose color's name is Unicorn. I've got a really short undercut with silver hair on one side of my head and long brown and kind of faded. This is overtone purple for brown, in case you were wondering, dye on the other side. I have these really gorgeous hot pink fat babe earrings like coming out of one of my ears. And what else? I'm surrounded by, I try and surround myself by sick and disabled, queer and trans people of color community wherever I go. So I'm sitting down and there's a hot pink wall behind me. And there's also an image of my beloved friend, Lucia Leandro Jimeno, who passed 3 months ago. LL was a non-binary, trans, fat, Black, Latinx, disabled healer, artist, birth worker. And there's an image of them just glowing, and they're wearing the t-shirt they always wore that said solid gold clit in really big letters. So I could say more, but that's who I am, and that's what I'm going to describe for now.
I love that so much. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I especially love the infusion of the word babe into the vocabulary. Love. And Sky, my dear old friend, you're next.
I'm Sky Kubakub, and I am coming from Meskwaki territory, and which it's just my specific neighborhood in Chicago. I am in my studio. There's like lots of racks of clothing in the background. There's a Rebirth sign, Rebirth logo sign, Nothing Without Us sign, Radical Visibility sign, lots of things. I know there's, oh yeah, sorry, I'm getting confused by the chat. I am wearing a pink scale mail headpiece that has also purple, turquoise, and yellow. There's makeup that looks like tattoos on my face, some spiky triangles along with a zigzag aqua eyebrow, a white grid, and a asymmetrical kind of snarl lip, because I like to be like tough, you know. I'm wearing chainmail, out of chainmail pink choker, a collaborative leather turquoise handpiece with my friend Emma Alamo, and some sheer jewel tones color blocked short loose t-shirt crop with like a couple of different layers on underneath that I will reveal during the dance party. I have giant gold glitter queer crip symbol earrings, which is a mishmash of the accessibility icon and the trans symbol that was a collaboration between me and my friend Alex Chen, who laser cut the symbol that I designed. And everything I'm wearing is all handmade by me, by hand. And yeah, I have Kala, my amazing employee, who's the best in the world, and my littlest fried chicken nugget doggy named Diogi, that like literally is a poodle that looks like some fried chicken. So they'll be around.
Wonderful. I want to just start the conversation by providing the audience with a bit of context just about how we got here, what we're doing, and what you can expect from the evening. We came to today's topic over many Zoom calls where we shared our art and our stories of how we've come to know each other and our connections to our friendships and our artistry. And I want to open the session by framing and sharing our relationships to each other and what it has meant to have these conversations and be in creative practice with one another. We've had many conversations behind the scenes. We're like the ladies of the View, prepping before we come out here and do it in front of a big audience. So Leah and Eli's work has explored risk, pleasure, and celebration before I ever knew much about disability artistry, with their practices going back to when I was just a disabled child. In Sky's work, I know intimately, as I've been lucky enough to be outfitted and model for their magnificent clothing line, Rebirth Garments. I mean, I've done the modeling, I've done the walk, I've walked the fashion shows, and I've even had Sky commissioned to make me some custom underwear that fit me oh so well, and which have been, you know, my scruff and grinder pictures for years, okay? Years. I'm telling you, my waist doesn't look the same, but the people on the apps don't have to know that. And I want to just say and acknowledge, this is an intergenerational conversation. We are intergenerational queer disabled artists, and my work and Sky's work would not be possible in the least without Eli and Leah's contributions to the field first and foremost. So I want to now invite Leah, to start with a story that you told us back a couple months ago about how you found yourself, how you happened upon Eli's writing for the first time.
Eli is so sick of this story. I'm always like, picture this. But okay, so picture this. So it's Toronto, it's 1999. I'm 24 years old. And I'm in Kensington Market at this long gone anarchist info shop called Who's Emma? And I see this copy of Exile and Pride on, I think there was a disability section and there was 3 books, and I don't remember what the other 2 were. And, that was at a moment in my life where I was so poor. And, this is also one of those, years later, it's one of those, oh, you didn't know you were autistic? Of course you didn't, but of course you were moments where I couldn't afford to buy books. So me and my lovers at the time had this practice of we knew all the bookstores that stayed open late, and we would just go there and we would just read full books that way. Like I'd sit there for 2 hours, I'd read 40 pages, I'd leave before they kicked me out, I'd come back the next day, and this was just normal. I just was like, I'm just very creative, not also creative and neurodivergent. So I remember seeing Eli's book, and it was on South End Press, which was an incredibly important independent radical press. Like, for folks who don't know, all of Bell Hooks' first books came out on that press, right? And they were known for publishing these really innovative, genre-crossing, grassroots activist intellectual books. And I picked up Eli's book, and I remember having this feeling of, which I now know is so common for disabled folks encountering disabled cultural work, of, am I allowed to read this? Because there's this real sense out there. I remember it from, a few years ago when I first came to Seattle. I had a job running the Disabled Student Center at the University of Washington. And it was this is in 2015, it was so common for students to come to the door and they would stop and they'd be like, am I allowed to come in here? Or do I need to show you my paperwork? And I'd be like, no, honey, like, you don't need any doctor to sign off on you. You don't even have to be disabled. You can just come in here. And they're like, are you sure? Are you sure I'm not going to get in trouble? Because this is how ableist, settler, colonialist, capitalist racism works, is we as disabled people, there's this sense that we've got to get some stamp of approval to be disabled, and that there's only 2 disabled parking spots, so you better not take up too many of them. And there's also, for a lot of us, especially those of us who are Black and brown, we've been taught to survive, no matter how so-called visible or not our disabilities are, by playing down our disability. But I picked up that book, which we talked about this, Eli, and you were like, yeah, they were kind of into everything but the disability. There's all the other stuff in the book. And I shoplifted it because I used to be a really good shoplifter. I've stopped because I don't need it anymore, but it really saved my ass. And as someone who's partially Roma, we come from a beautiful tradition of stealing to survive. And I took it home with me. And I want to say that in my own cultural work now, something I always say when, I have a book come out is, I'm like, if you can't afford it, go to your library and get them to order it. Because I know that there's specific ways that as disabled people we're kept from each other. And that could be because we're institutionalized or in jail. It also could be that because of the carcerality of ableism, if I had $1 for every person who was like, well, I don't know if I can call myself that, I'd have paid off my $100,000 in student loans, right? And I could buy a nice little accessible house for everybody. But there's a way that books are a community and an organizing strategy that goes to people. And I took that book home, and it's fascinating because I've been really disabled for 3 or 4 years. And I had deeply been involved in the psychiatric thriver community in Toronto. And yet it was 1999. So I was still like, oh, I don't know, because the disability rights movement was still very white, cis, male, only certain kinds of physical disability counted. And I was like, if I show up as this brown femme with fibromyalgia and complex PTSD, they're going to be like, you don't get to hang out in the Center for Independent Living. But I had a book, and I got to go home and read those disabled words in private, and it was a community in my pocket. And I think that is something that, as disabled cultural workers, that's some of the importance that we do, whatever our cultural work is, whether it's a book, a podcast, I'm thinking of the autistic community of people like Mel Bags, right? Who's, rest in power, whose autistic, non-binary, radical blog spot has been such a beacon for so many of us. I think about whenever I was brought into autistic community by, Saray Jarrell Johnson, who's a Black autistic trans writer and genius, and many other autistic BIPOC folks who were like, hey, you might not just be a friend of the family, you might be the family. And I really reach out to other folks who I think might be neurodivergent too, who didn't think they could identify that way. And I'm always like, follow these hashtags. And these are ways we reach for each other and we create community when we are separated because we are in our beds, we are in institutions, accessoride doesn't exist in rural spaces, or when it's just too dangerous for us to find each other. Yeah, so, and Eli's told me I don't owe him the 1995, which is really great. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Leah. I was 7 in 1999. So we were talking about when me being a child. There we are, temporally. Eli, first I have a question that isn't in the script, and that's just, what does it mean to hear, I mean, we've all reflected to each other the ways in which our works have impacted one another, but a story like that from 1999, where, you put this work into the world and people are reading it who don't know you, but you don't know to the extent that you're having an effect on someone else. How does hearing that reflected back all these years later make you feel?
First, so there are two things for me to say right now. First, I do not want to make this about me. Like, this is a story that's only important because it's a story about how we claim each other and how we find each other. This is not a story about me. This is the story about claiming, finding, choosing, loving each other, right? And that's the only thing I say tonight. It's the most important thing I'll say all evening. But now, Ryan, to turn to your question, because that's also a real question. Every time Leah tells this story, and it's a story I hold near and dear, as someone who has shoplifted books and food out of survival. Every time I hear that story, I remember 1998. So I've just finished the book. It's my first book, and it's the first time that abuse stories, my abuse stories, and there will be no details about that abuse here. My abuse stories, my growing up in this tiny rural coastal town in Oregon. White, homophobic, and racist as hell town. My love of trees and my growing connection to disability community and my search for queer disability community and my messy gender journey are all going to be publicly displayed in the same book. I've just cut contact with my father. I have no idea what he's going to do if he ever finds this book. And I almost went to my publisher and tore the friggin' contract up. I was like, I cannot do this. I cannot do this. Contract did not get cut up, but I was sure that I thought that the book was successful if 5 people I didn't know read it and didn't laugh me off the face of the planet. You know, I saw someone talking about feeling like an imposter earlier in the chat. I thought the book was going to reveal me as the biggest imposter in the universe because I didn't actually have disability community on a local basis. I saw some disabled people occasionally at demos. I saw some straight disabled people at the local CIL who I felt no connection with. They were so straight and invested in respectability politics. I had lots of queer community, and I thought disability community worked exactly like queer community, and every other politicized disabled person had lots of disability community in their local communities. Jokingly, that's not the way disability community, queer disability community, what I witness in BIPOC disability community, that's just not how it looks. But at that moment, I felt like a complete imposter publishing this book. So really, I expected 5 people, not my friends, to read it and maybe not laugh me off the planet. So 21 years, 22 years later, that it's still being read and used and it's useful humbles me and makes me so full of gratitude and makes me want to pass that, claiming that, finding that, loving that connection. And when I say loving, I don't just mean romantic, sexual, best friends. I mean loving in this radical way that's sometimes full of joy and sometimes full of holy shit, how am I going to ever be in that room with that person ever again? Loving. I'm full of wanting to spread those things so that we all have it. So that the people who are not here tonight, the people who are not in this disability features cohort, the people who are producing important art at their kitchen table that never sees the light of day, who are completely isolated, have those things.
I mean, wow. Thank you. Wow. Wow. I'm so glad I asked a different question. That was extraordinary. And I would like to retire now, but no, thank you. It was really powerful and moving. I do want to pivot though to our first artistic sharing of the evening. And Leah, that means you. You have a poem to share with us?
Yeah, I do. You suggested this one. So everything I'm going to share is from, this feels well to say, my 5th upcoming book of poetry, which is tentatively entitled The Way Disabled People Love Each Other, which feels fitting for the topic of this conversation. And it's called My People. My people are the fuck-ups, the runaways, the ones who waited to tell their parents till they were over 21 so they couldn't maybe be committed. The ones whose therapy is backpacks and shoplifting and silence. The ones who grow as much of our own food in the backyard as we can, as a survival mechanism, not a fun green hobby. The ones who whisper, I will beat you with a pipe. I am feral as fuck. And even though I am now somehow an unexpected sort of success, I still don't know how to adult or tame. I'm always this close to walking into the woods with everything I own in a ripped up white plastic bag. That's it.
Wow. I just keep saying, wow. I should think of different words because, but it's so stunning. It's so stunning.
you.
I have a reaction to a phrase, an unexpected sort of success. Because I don't think that we, as disabled people, the world doesn't expect us to be successful or give us permission
Mhm.
to be successful. And how dare we if we are?
Mhm.
And so that really hit me. For Eli and Sky, are there anything else from the poem that affected you?
Also, if you need a moment, I have something I'd love to just write.
Oh.
I love that. Something I want to say about success.
Yes.
Yeah, because I mean, yes to everything you just said. And also, I think we crip success because, that's why I said an unexpected sort of success, right? Because, and it's actually, so okay, I'm going to say everything at once, but it's always really important when I do a gig and everyone's like, oh, let's read this bio with all the stuff you've done, for me to be like, totally. And also, I'm still a fuck up. Like, I was still an autistic, sick failure of a young brown survivor. I mean, in some ways, I was the kind of autistic person who gets tracked into the gifted program and also gets yelled at because it's like, why can't you do this, that, or the other? And I also was, my abuse survival story is all wrapped up with my brownness, my disability, my neurodivergence. And I was a real failure without a lot of social capital for a really long time. And that stuff could come back at any moment. And I'm really committed to not, and I think I say this especially because, especially right now in this, gotta love it, but Ford Foundation funded, we're the 20 Crips who got the fellowship thing. Something we all talked about was when we entered into this fellowship, not wanting to use it to divide us from everybody who didn't get it. Like, I don't want to be the one special cripple who's real smart. I don't want that. That's not my vision of liberation. Like, I'm like, okay, I'm going to take some money. I'm going to use this resource. And also, I'm going to commit to being like, no, we cannot, I don't want a movement or disabled cultural spaces where it's just the ones that are quote unquote productive who get to count. There are so many people who are just as brilliant as me who are in lockup right now or dead or don't have a computer, or aren't in the first world, right? And for me also, as somebody who it's interesting, I'm writing this piece called Weird Things That Happened After my book Care Work came out. And it's also called How Dare You Still Be Disabled? Because I got this book that came out and then people were like, oh, you're going to come and do 48 things in one day. And then they're surprised. I'm like, no, I'm on the toilet. Like, that's what I did today. That's how, everyone's like, you're really busy. And I'm like, having IBS or having a mental breakdown or just doing a lot of everyday crip, non-glamorous stuff. But for me, I think that one thing I would just say is that it's really important and something that we're not often given, to be able to define our own definitions of what disabled success is, of what a really good disabled queer, trans, Black, brown life is, and that's what I want this to be a part of. That's the, as Janet Mock coined the term, possibility modeling, that I want us to be. And I need it to be plural, that there's many, many ways to have a wonderful disabled life. So, okay, I'm going to shut up now. Sky and Eli, what do you want to say?
Yes, any further reactions to the poem before we move forward?
I would say that it's like you're just describing all the people that I wanted to make my clothing for and who I wanted to model for my clothing line, and like just the people that I'm always working with and my friends. Like I really do vibe with this poem a lot. And I also am a person who it's like, yeah, maybe I will just not walk into the woods because I am not a nature outdoors person because too many allergies, but maybe I'll walk into a bubble. No, not in space. I would also die there. So I will walk into a sterile bubble somewhere and hide away from people. And yeah, I'm similar in that, yeah, I also was like, tracked through the gifted programs, but then was having panic attack, like very, quote unquote, disruptive panic attacks in grade school, high school, college. I mean, some of my worst were in college, where I'd be literally crying, like heavily crying all throughout class, and like while other people are doing presentations, things like that. So even though it's wild, because sometimes, not right now, but like sometimes now that I'm out of college, it's like, oh, maybe I'm not really that disabled anymore because I have full autonomy and I get to do whatever I want. But then I think about, my youth and being in school and being like, oh, I was like very visibly neurodivergent then, but not now. So I don't know. I just thinking about, being a fuck up who also somehow is getting stuff done.
Sky, I think that's a great segue into a little film of your work with Rebirth Garments. So first we need the audio describer to describe the top of the video, but before we go to the screen, is there anything you'd like to say about this clip before we see it?
Yeah, so this is a collaborative thing. So whenever I do like a Rebirth Garments performance that has audio descriptive music that's like built into the performance, it's called Radical Visibility Collective, which is based off of my manifesto, Radical Visibility, a queer crip dress reform movement manifesto, which is also in Alice Wong's Disability Visibility. This is just a clip of it at the very end, so you can see all of the beautiful models, but there have been 2 performances, and you can look up the music, and we're going to be dancing to some of it in the dance virtual fashion performance later. But yeah, I worked with Compton Q as a co-designer along with Jake Vogues, and Vogues was the executive producer on the music, and along with Say Kevi, Afro Shoujo, and Juju Minx as singers, rappers on the album for this show.
Okay, let's jump to the video if we can.
One clothing line alone is not enough to destroy societal oppression. There needs to be something so widely accessible that anyone can participate. So, I suggest a politically forceful aesthetic style called radical visibility. Physical visibility is an important step towards political and social freedom and equality. Sky Kabaku.
Join the movement. Queer crip power. Spill me blooming like a flower. They thin, black, non-binary, tall, shy, but they'll stand up for themselves if it's called.
SpongeBob said, it's always the best time.
The inability to value queer lives is related to the inability to imagine disabled lives. Both are failures of the imagination, supporting and supported by the drive towards normalcy and normalization. Allison Kingford.
Join the movement. Queer crypto world. Still be blooming. Like a flower. Fly high, but baby.
White girl with a big butt. Thick thighs make a blow good. Strike a pose, then another one. Small chest, but her heart is open wide. Got short hair on the side. Got that cape on behind. It snaps off if you like. Skirt flowing like the Chi-Town River. Green vest looking like it could have been denim. Holographic emblem of the queer crib symbol. Let it catch the light so they can really get the picture. She don't have lack of access to quilted fleece and patches. Power chair strut, feet don't even have to touch the ground. She's bound to move her head around. Bando bra, keep the girl sitting pretty. Logo, you know it's radical visibility. Let the people see. We're not afraid of you. No matter what they say, we will not shy away. Make a choice today.
Thank you, Sky, for that extraordinary piece of audiovisual stimulation. And as somebody who has modeled your clothing, I just feel it is so indicative of beauty and sensuality and sexuality and color and glamour and fabulousness. Eli, I want to ask if you have any quick reactions to that, to seeing that video.
There's so much I could say about it, but I want to extend this theme of the intergenerational conversation, wherein there was a moment as we were having that conversation in a really deep way, I don't know, 6 weeks or so, when I said, and to give this context, I'm 57 years old, and I have to say that because I know I don't look 57. I said to Sky, you're taking so much risk with your work, and the risks in that clip take my breath away. And I was like, that's a piece of art that could never have been made 30 years ago because the risk would have been so high. And this guy looked at me and was like, what are you talking about? Like absolutely don't understand. I said very carefully, not wanting to be a wannabe white elder in this space, but I'm like, would it help you? Would it help to hear a little about what was risky there? And the answer is, oh yes. And it's like this complete celebration of hypervisibility. Complete celebration. It's celebration not attached to sorrow or to violence or to protest. I mean, it's connected to all of that down, not so far under the surface, but it's also this hyper visible celebration. And 30 years ago, that kind of hypervisibility, there was so much. It's not like the risk is much less now, but it's slightly less risky. It's the risk doesn't, I mean, visibility is such like a double, triple, quadruple edged thing that trans women of color have been saying for a while now. Look, visibility in the media is not making us any fucking safer in our homes and on the streets, but that's also not an argument against this radical visibility. And so something I see when I see that clip is just what it means when we have spaces where that kind of hypervisibility is celebration. And it makes my heart sing that we have spaces, not enough yet, but we have a few spaces where hypervisibility in community is pure celebration.
I don't know how to do this delicately, but I have to do it. We're going to switch gears to what is the celebration of someone's life. A dear mutual friend of Leah and Eli, and a huge, huge activist for disability that we all have looked up to and revered. And to begin that, if Leah, you could provide a little bit of context about your friend before going into your next poem.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So I'm pretty sure Sky, I think almost everybody on this call, maybe not to leave people out if you didn't know this person, but there's a lot of folks on this call who were friends, lovers, comrades, people evolving with Stacey Park Milburn, who, you know, would never want to be revered, ever, but was such a light and a force, and still is, in creating disability justice, and who, you know, I just always say that I had the wild good luck of being friends and comrades with her for 11 years with Breaks, and who passed last year on May 19th, 2020. And yeah, you know, last year I was just a grieving, sick mess, like a lot of us in quarantine. And I wrote some poems, and some of them are going to be private forever, and some of them might not be. But something I want to say, Ryan, in terms of just, you know, the disabled work of memory, is that, I mean, there's a lot I could say, but, you know, one of the millions of ways that abled world tries and kills us is by keeping us from each other while we're alive and erasing us from collective memory once we're dead, you know? And one of the first people that I learned poetry from, the great Afro-Caribbean, bisexual, disabled poet, June Jordan, right? Who lived and died with breast cancer, and who many of us in disability justice space now, we've gone back and we're like Audre Lorde and June Jordan and Gloria Anzaldúa and Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. All of those folks may or may not have used the word disabled, but they were, and their disabilities in their work. And something that Stacey talked about a lot was the ways in which those of us who are disabled and alive talk with and have relationships with the disabled dead. And I'm going to read a quote from her where Stacey said, "Ancestorship, like love, is expansive and breaks man-made boundaries cast upon it, like the nuclear family model or artificial nation-state boundaries. My ancestors and me are learning and loving together." And she said that before she became an ancestor last year. So one thing that June talked a lot about was that poetry was the people's newspaper, that you can write poems on the bus, you know, you can write poems on a piece of toilet paper. Lucille Clifton, famously, you know, she, you know, Black genius feminist poet, all of her poems are kind of short because she had a lot of kids, and she was like, this is 16 lines is what I could remember, right? Which is also a crip hack. So a lot of my work throughout my life as a poet has been to write to remember and record. not just people who've died, but also just these, you know, queer and trans people of color moments, these Sri Lankan moments, these queer and trans disabled of color moments, and to remember the people, but also to remember like the moments and dynamics of our love for each other. So sorry, I would totally have been booed off the stage if this was a poetry slam, because I maybe over-explained this poem, but I'm gonna read this poem. It's called I Love You Like an Autistic Person Does. I love you like an autistic person does, and I mourn you like an autistic person does too, with too many tears for far too long. Not the 2 weeks permissible, but months after. And sometimes when I wake and sometimes when I sleep, sometimes 7 hours curled up in the half of the orange couch boat, I cry the hurt. I echo, I miss you so much. I mourn you in my big autistic silent singing house I live in by myself with my 2 cats. This is where I live. This is the place you never saw, you couldn't have made it into. But you were still here. You are in these pink walls, this fireplace. I was gonna move and then it came to me singing. My room and yours was where the second act of our friendship lived. I saw you in person once a year at best, but we were constantly entwined in texts and Zoom lectures and webinars we co-taught and snarky texts all during in between us explaining what ableism was to blinking heads. You texted me in bed and I texted you in bed. We sent each other gifts all the time. These pink walls witnessed our crypt friendship. The way my old roommate said, whenever I heard you 2 laughing on the phone, I thought that's Leah talking with her sister. And you were, the way an autistic orphan has a sister, the way disabled people love each other. So yeah, sorry I'm depressing, but I just, if I can, you know, diagram the sentence of my own poems, I just wanted to say that going back to stuff that Eli and Sky have both said, and I think Ryan, you too, you know, the ways that we desire each other, like the topic of this, you know, session, which is about learning to find each other and desire each other and love each other sexually and not. It's not automatic and it doesn't look the way abled people have relationships. I got into a fight with an abled friend once where he was like, well, we only see each other once a year. What do you mean you love me? And I was like, wow, you're really normal, you know? And we crypt friendship. And, you know, we are geniuses in the ways we find to reach to each other and love each other. And I wanted to write a specific way of autistic mourning, loving and mourning and loving through mourning, you know, my disabled Asian femme friend and comrade. And also talking about the disabled ways we had a friendship and still do, right? Hi, Tina. Yeah, and Yomi, Stacey's love was so dope. She was a fucking genius at Crip Love. And I always say a lot that she helps dream us into other disabled BIPOC people into being. You know, she helped me love myself. Like, she was such a maestra at unconditional Crip love. And one of the ways that she loved and organized was just finding ways that other disabled, you know, people of color who were queer and trans, finding the places where we really had been thrown away and disposed of and hated and loving us there unconditionally. Like, she would just, you know, send me these, I have a screenshot I put up where she was just like 2 a.m, like, I just want you to know you're so good. Or she'd be like, here's this autism gif I'm gonna send you, you know, and like no big deal, but a big deal. And I often am like, I'll shut up after this, but you know, when the able people are like, how do we do disability justice, right? And it's like, and I'm like, I could give you the checklist, but it's a lot of really subtle and beautiful dynamics that we practice and that we co-create with each other, that if you're not there, you might not know. I mean, I'm starting to write this series called Tiny Disabled Moments, you know, where they're just like, it's not the ADA checklist, you know, it's like these glances, it's knowing, it's learning each other's languages, because cross-disability solidarity, a lot of the time it's like language immersion, where it's like, okay, maybe we're all romance language, but yours is a little different. Like, we all speak Crip, but we speak different kinds of it. So, yeah, okay, I'm gonna shut up. Thanks for hearing me. And it's a practice. It's a practice. We don't automatically know how to know each other. In fact, we've been taught how to hate each other. And a lot of us have always been the only ones. So it really takes work to figure out how to love each other. It's not automatic. It's not magical. It's a practice. Okay, I'm really gonna shut up.
Wow. Wow. Again, I'm back to saying wow. A lot of us have always been the only one. That is completely, yes. So many people's lived experience, and that is what we together here are fighting against by coming together. Eli, you have a poem yourself called Heartbreak, which speaks to Leah's poem. Would you like to say a few words before starting, or just dive right in?
What I want to say is I started writing this poem before Stacy died. And I finished this poem after she died. And we were in the middle of pandemic. And that we claim ourselves and each other through celebration. And we claim and find each other through sorrow and grief and heartbreak that's both specific to particular people and is also accumulated. So, heartbreak. Heart of lake at flood level. Heart of stone, heart of pine, heart of glacier collapsing. Heart of spasm and stem, heart of river no longer reaching its estuary, heart of scientists working to create a vaccine for which the whole world is waiting. Heart of hummingbird, hive, hay barn, heart of octopus and damselfly, heart of ER nurse after a 16-hour shift, heart of thunderhead, heart of apple tree, heart of janitor cleaning rooms of the newly dead, heart of queerness, heart of no justice, no peace, heart of rook and pawn placed on a chessboard, heart of falcon nesting atop a skyscraper, heart of tightrope walker at 2 a.m., heart of dance floor, disco ball, drag queen after 1 too many whiskey sours, heart of Black Lives Matter, heart of snake, mouse, owl, heart of bedrock, heart of treehouse, heart of grief, heart of jet stream, heart of moon, heart of sandhill crane, heart of rumble, heart of rage, heart of hallucination, heart of hardness, heart of slowness, heart of worry, heart of orgasm, heart of gasping for breath, heart of ventilator, heart quivering, heart stumbling, heart beginning to stop, beginning to break, beginning to rise.
Stunning. Stunning, stunning, stunning. Thank you so much, Eli. We have gone over a bit, which of course we were going to. I don't know why they didn't factor in crib time when planning these sessions. But so we're going to have to wrap up soon, take a break before the dance party. But I just want any final words from the three of you. This has been such a gift for me to be here in space with you. And is there anything that you'd like to share before we say, before we pause and dance?
This is Sky speaking. Didn't Eli have one more poem? Maybe.
I'm trying to get permission to get Eli to read that poem. Okay, we just got the cue. Go for it. Eli, would you like to go into Twitches and Tremors? I've been given the go ahead.
Okay. So serious that this work of claiming, finding, loving each other is about celebration, about grief, about desire, and desire of all kinds. This poem comes from my most recent book called Brilliant Imperfection, The idea of drawing the imperfection I learned from Sebastian Margaret, comrade and friend. And then the book, I resist defining brilliant imperfection, but I write these poems about brilliant imperfection. So this is Twitches and Tremors. You and I have just finished facilitating a day-long training. Back in our hotel room, we collapse onto a bed, out of words, breath, energy. We lay next to each other, your head light against my shoulder. You brush my ribs. I flinch. Your hands twitch again on my skin. I answer with tremor, starting as always behind my right shoulder blade, descending my arm. My touch vibrates into you, your hands twitch and curl over me, triggering a cascade of tremors. Slow, my muscles don't lock. Tremors rise to meet twitches, call and response. I've had lovers tell me how good my shaky touch feels. Tremors likened to extra caresses or driving over a gravel road. Their words and the antidote to shame. But until now, I had never felt the pleasure they describe. Your twitches spread across my skin. Tingle, echo, dance. Brilliant imperfection.
Twitches and Tremors by Eli Clare. Thank you. Thank you for the extra time. Thank you for sharing of your hearts and your beautiful, beautiful minds and artistry. It's been a real gift. And we're not going away. We're going to just take a pause and we're going to come back for a dance party. Thank you all who have joined us, and we hope you will stay for part 2. Bye-bye.
It's Lane again, now wearing a bright pink, purple, orange, and blue face mask created by Rebirth Garments. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Eli and Sky, for sharing your stories, for sharing your wows, for sharing your hearts with us. We're going to take a quick 3-minute break now to set up for the dance party, but don't go anywhere. We'll have a live DJ set from DJ Who Girl, and models join us for Rebirth Garments, from Rebirth Garments for a virtual runway. Our chat manager will be adding the link to a dance party access guide in the chat box. Shortly, you can download Zoom backgrounds and find out more about the dance party magicians there. We'll be back in 3. Thanks.